Hey you guys, it's Teresa and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the books or series that have changed my life, and there's a lot of books on this list, so without further ado, let's just jump right in. Alright, so I have two books on this list that I couldn't find my copies of. They're probably buried in the back of my bookshelves, and I don't want to go through digging like 4 different layers to find them, so we'll just start off with those two. But first off, I wanted to say that these books, for a number of reasons, have somehow found their way into my life and have changed kind of how I see the world, or maybe how I see myself, and I just thought I'd share them with you. These books come in no particular order because I could not bring myself to put them in an order, if that makes sense. So we'll just kind of leave it at that. But the first book on this list is Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. Now, I read this book when I was a freshman in high school, and I couldn't understand it. I was like, what is this point? The only part that I understood about the book is that he got beat up by a stripper, or like by the stripper's like pimp or boss, or however the hip young people call those people. And that was all I remembered. But then I reread it back in my senior year of high school, and I thought the world of it. I still think the world of it. I think that I thought that the main character, Holden, I could understand him a bit better. He was kind of struggling with his identity and kind of figuring out who he was. He didn't want to fit into what everyone else wanted to see him as, which I felt for, considering I was graduating high school and kind of going to this big gigantic world I had no idea about whatsoever. So I kind of felt with him there, and my teacher at the time even told me that it was very, a lot of students will actually do the same thing, where they try to read it in the beginning of their high school career or college career, and they don't get it, and then they'll come back to it a few years later and they're like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. So I guess I fall under that, but yeah. The next book on this list is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, and this book has already become a Hulu series. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard nothing but great about it. And for those of you guys who don't know, this is about basically there's been an epidemic where women can't conceive anymore, so the handmaids are kind of in charge of that. Like, they have to have sex with the head of the household, the male, and they conceive the children after his wife is no longer able to do that. And I think this is a book that I didn't see much, I liked it. I thought there were a lot of important themes in it. I didn't see much of a relevance to it until recent years, where we see a lot of people trying to control women's rights to birth control and their women's rights to conceive and reproduction. And I think it's a very interesting thing, considering it's a dystopian story set in the future of America, and I think that it's something that everyone should read and kind of see why it's become such a big deal and why it's so important. But the next book on this list is one of my personal favorites, and that is Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. Now, for those of you who don't know, it follows what's his name? Charlie. This follows Charlie, and we see his letters. He's writing them to an unknown person named Friend, and he's talking about kind of how he's getting through life in high school. He's a freshman when this book starts, and we get to see kind of his understanding of the world and what happened to him in his life, which caused him to kind of internalize everything and whatnot. And I was reading just this during a rough time in my freshman year of college, and it really resonated to me. And even to this day, it's one of those books, I recommended it to my sister, and she constantly goes back to it. She wants to keep rereading it, and I'm the same way. I absolutely adore the movie as well, and I think that it's also another book that if you're kind of stuck in a rut or stuck in a place, or don't understand yourself, even regardless of whether or not you're Charlie's age, it's something that you will resonate with, and you'll kind of feel for him and cry a lot. This book and the movie had me sobbing. I still watch the movie every chance I get, and I still sob at the end of it. I still sob when I read this book, but I would definitely recommend this if you're looking for something. And it's not a quick read, but it's an easy read. It's all in letters, and you just kind of see his progression throughout his year in high school, I believe. Yes. So I would definitely read this if I were you. Just pick it up. You will not be disappointed. So the next book on this list is a book you guys are all probably tired of hearing about, But I just really love this book so much. Like, this is probably one of the few classics out there that I will like stand by forever and never let go. But that is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And for those of you who don't know or haven't seen a video on this channel, The Picture of Dorian Gray is about this guy named Dorian Gray, and he wishes that his painting that his friend made would age while he remains forever young. So every time he commits a sin, he'll notice like little wrinkles on his face, little like age marks, and the painting gets more and more decrepit while he stays perfectly young. And you see kind of his personality and his mindset kind of slowly degenerate during that time frame. And it's really interesting because Oscar Wilde wrote this as a pushback for art's sake. He was one of the people who's like, art doesn't need a purpose. We gotta stop giving it a purpose. It's literally there for aesthetic and leave it as is. So I would definitely read this. The writing style is beautiful. Dorian Gray, while he's a terrible person, he's like a terrible person with some kind of sense, because this immortal life has been thrust upon him, and when it becomes like all too much for him, you can see it slowly turning his world and his mind upside down. And it's just such a great read, you guys. I cannot tell you guys enough how much I love this book. So the next book on this list is a book that I read back in high school, but it's still really great. I love it. I love the movies made about it. Well, the one with Leonardo DiCaprio. But it's just great. And that is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. For those of you guys who don't know, this follows Nick, who meets Gatsby, who is this super hard party thrower, and all he does is throw parties in hopes of getting Daisy, his ex-love of his life, to notice him and attend a party, and they'll fall back in love together. And this is also set in the 1920s, which is the Jazz age and the Inhibition age, and I think it's just great. I think not only is this kind of very symbolic of the American dream, but also shows how that can kind of get twisted in your own head, and kind of how the idea that distance makes the heart grow fonder is incorrect. Distance causes some idealization that isn't necessarily true in the heart, if that makes sense. But I would definitely go ahead and pick it up. Everyone's always like, The Great Gatsby is all about parties and blah blah blah, and it's like, no, it's not. If you read the book instead of looking at the previews for the dang movie, which is amazing, you would understand. Now we're moving on to series, and like I said, this has no particular order. But the first series on this book is probably one that's on like a lot of booktubers series, like favorite series, and that is Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. For those of you guys who don't know or haven't seen the movies, I suggest you do both. But that is Harry finds out he's a wizard and is thrown into the wizarding world, and he not only finds out he's a wizard, but also he finds out that that the person who ended up killing his parents is the person who wants to kill him, and that he's this chosen boy, this lone survivor of this family massacre, and kind of him dealing with that. But I would definitely go ahead and read it. This book changed my life, mainly because it was one of the few books that got me into reading like series. I was an avid reader when I was younger, but it was very standalones. I didn't get into series until much later, and this was, I think, one of the books that did it for me. As you can tell, I need a new one. Like there's tape all along the sides. The book is missing a corner thanks to my dog. There's some pages torn, and it just looks really aged. And you can just tell there's a lot of love with this book. So I would just go ahead and pick it up if you haven't already. You really won't be disappointed. I could go on for days about Harry Potter, but I'm not. I'm just going to put this down. The next series on this list is probably one you're probably going to start laughing or giggling, but I have my reasons for putting this book on here, or this series on here, and that is Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. I know. Let's just hold the judgmental stares, or these I'm right there with you kind of judgments, for another time. But for those of you guys who don't know, this series is about Bella Swan, who moves from Arizona to Washington, and there she meets Edward Cullen, who is much more than he seems. And I'm sure at this point everyone knows it's about vampires, you guys. Vampires and werewolves and all this fun stuff. But this book made such an impact on my life, because I kind of didn't know what I was gonna do. This was like in middle school, which is saying a lot. Like I didn't have to figure it out. but I just knew that I loved reading. I wanted to get more into writing because I used to be a writer when I was younger, and then it kind of stopped. And I saw that Stephenie Meyer was a writer. She is a writer. She has a master's in English Lit, and I was like, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna be a writer. I'm gonna go into English literature. And here we are, 6 or 7 years, 10 years later? 10 years later. I am graduating in May with a creative writing degree and psychology, and I'm working on so many stories that I hope to see on the shelves in the future. So I just kind of owe it all to Stephenie Meyer, because I think that whatever she did in this book inspired me to be a writer and inspired me to get back into the mode of writing. And I don't know, I just owe it to her in a sense, even though reading it, the books are very flat, but we're not going to get into that. The next series on this list is a really long series. It took me like years to read this. I started in middle school and didn't end until like my senior year of high school. But that is the Sweep series by Kate Tiernan. For those of you guys who don't know, the Sweep series are primarily focused on witches, and this focuses on Morgan Rowlands, who is pulled into this witchy world by Cal. And he's just a magical person, but a really shitty person later. And like I said, it's just a really good series. I would definitely recommend reading. It's one of those series, like, I struggle with first person, but this is one of those books that I was just like, oh my goodness, I can see myself in the character's eyes, and it's just perfect. And I understand a lot of it. And I think kind of what changed it for me was that I could really relate to Morgan on a personal level, in terms of kind of what she understands. She doesn't necessarily feel like she fits in with her family, and that's what I was feeling back in high school. Her family is heavily Catholic, and she was, and then she isn't later on in the series, which again I feel with. I understand that feeling. So just reading about her and kind of her journey going through, going from what everyone's ideal version of her is to this person she wants to become is something that I find like I needed to read at that time in my life, which was like high school, like middle school, high school, where we're all like the angsty teenager who just kind of yells, who like doesn't get along with their parents and wears dark eyeliner and is like, no, it's not a phase, mom. The dark eyeliner will forever be part of my life, kind of thing. While hers is a different phase. She's a witch, and like I said, her parents are very devoutly Catholic. So yeah, I would suggest to read this book if you're looking for something, because this is one of the books that has gotten me really into witches and kind of paganism and Wicca, and it's just really great. And it's not like fantasy witches where they kind of cackle over a boiling cauldron. This is kind of, there's a bit of fantasy elements into it and a bit of magic realism, but it does follow a very similar kind of baseline Wiccan creeds and Wiccan practices, which is really interesting to read. So the next series on this list is The Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare. And for those of you guys who don't know, The Mortal Instruments follows around Clary Frey, and she, on the eve of her 16th birthday, she finds this, she gets thrown into this shadow world where she finds out that she's not just a normal human, she's a shadow hunter. And their job is to protect the humans from everything from demons to vampires to werewolves to like evil warlocks, and kind of the overall world that is hidden beyond what lies behind it. This book actually matters to me for a lot of reasons. One, I don't know, the characters to me are just so like, I can relate to them on so many levels, and I think that's really important. Especially since it's such a long-standing series, it's important for people to be able to feel for their characters. And not only that, but there's a lot of like undertones of like racism and a little bit of homophobia, and it's not even like the smack dab racism or homophobia that we see in a lot of books. It's a very subtle kind of thing, like it's very ingrained and they don't even realize they're doing it, which I think is a very interesting thing. And on top of that, I really understand very highly, like I understand on a personal level, Alec Lightwood and I are the same person. The only difference is he is gay and I am bisexual, but he, like, just kind of his struggle and where he is as a person, kind of being really angry at the world because he couldn't accept himself. as well as kind of feeling the pressures of being the eldest child. It's something I relate to on a personal level, and just reading it just makes me so happy that he's found happiness, because when I finished this series, I was slowly coming to terms with those things as well. So, Alec Lightwood, you are my hero. The next series on this list kind of follows the same series that I just mentioned before, and that is the Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. And for those of you guys who don't know, this follows Tessa Gray, and on the road to finding her brother, she goes to Victorian London. It's set in Victorian London, and she gets thrown into the shadow world, and she realizes she's not just a human, but this weird mix of other things that I'm not going to get into because spoilers. And I just really love this series. Aside from that, Cassandra Clare's writing has changed so dramatically from the Mortal Instruments to the Clockwork to Infernal Devices, and it's so magical to see how well she's grown as a writer. And you get to see a lot of people that we've seen in previous books, and kind of understand the history behind the Shadow World and the Shadow Hunters, as well as this really lovely love triangle, who is not even like a love triangle. Like, I just wish them the best. Like, if they were all to just die, I just want them all to be happy in shadow hunting heaven. And that's all I can really say about it. And I don't necessarily know, like, I don't have a concrete reason as to why this series changed my life or has influenced my life. I think it's just the characters' vibrancy, and I think with a lot of Cassandra Clare's writing, I aspire to be her as a writer in terms of how vibrant her characters are and how well they've grown throughout the novels, and that's just like a really good goal to aspire to, because they're just like, her characters just grow so much, and it's not even a bam kind of grow. It's very much like you see them gradually grow, and like as the more books come out, you kind of grow with them, and it's just so magical. You guys just pick up, like, if you don't like the Mortal Instruments, pick up the Infernal Devices. It's only a trilogy, and I think that it's something that needs to be read. Like, I don't want to say it needs to be read, but I feel like it's just great, and I think you should really read it. Alright, the last series on this list is one series that I just finished recently and I'm still hungover from, and that is A Court of Thorn and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Now, for those of you guys who don't know or haven't seen me ramble about these books, this series is about Feyre, who ends up killing a wolf, and that wolf ends up to be a fairy, and the High Lord takes her back as kind of a debt to be repaid after killing the life, and she's thrown into this kind of fairy world and this weird like situation that she would have never seen herself in, and we kind of see her change throughout it. And in terms of how this like changed, like how it influenced me, it's a very new kind of influence. It's honestly, like I said, I'm a big character-driven reader. I'm a character-driven writer. Characters that transform in front of my eyes are something that I will always stand by. But on top of that, like, the characters are not only so vibrant and so real to me, like, it's on the same level of like Cassandra Clare. I want to be able to write those characters, and I wasn't sure how to go about writing my own personal fairy story. I have one in the works, but that one is kind of one, like, this inspired me in a sense to kind of play around with it a bit more, because the fairy books I've read have been very on the nose with the mythology, and she kind of turns it on its head and makes it kind of interesting and kind of dark and creepier and darker than they can possibly get. And that's something I want to do with my book, as well as give life to the characters I've put so much work into creating. And I just read the book, read the series, you guys won't be disappointed. Like, the writing is just so magical, and I'm gonna stop babbling, and I'll just leave my series review of the series down below, and you guys can go ahead and see for yourself kind of how you guys, whether or not you guys want to read it, but I really hope you guys do. But that is it for the books or series that have changed my life. If you guys have similar books or in the same boat as me with some of these books, please leave your thoughts down below. I would love to have a conversation with you guys about these. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up, and I'll try to keep more of these kinds of videos coming. Other than that, hit subscribe. I try to have videos up every Saturday or Sunday, depending on my schedule, and every Tuesday of the week I will see you guys on Saturday Bye.